the development of armor, both Canadian, Allied, and those of our past enemies. Now, before we start, I have to go over a few safety procedures. At no time can any member of the public enter the tank arena. These concrete barriers are here for your protection. On the rest of the field, that is a snow fence. It is a visual barrier only, so please do not lean on or climb on the snow fence. If at any time somebody enters the tank arena, this is what you'll hear. Three blasts, that is an audio signal to everybody on the field, including the vehicle crews, that something has gone wrong. If you do hear that, please stay exactly where you are until the all clear is sounded. Also, you'll notice to the left of me here in the tower, there is a green flag. That is a visual marker for the vehicle crews. As you can hear far back in the tank arena, these machines can be fairly loud. So this allows the crews to see that it is safe to operate in the tank arena. If I have to blast the horn, or if any other warning comes over the radios, as you can see, there's many radios here in the tower, communication with the vehicle crews and with the rest of our staff, then you'll see a red flag. A red flag will go out, and that's a visual marker to the vehicle crews that it is not safe to drive in the arena. Okay, we're about to get started, so I'll just ask everybody if you could please remove your hats for our national anthem. All right, we're ready to begin. So Tank Saturday, once a month, we have 83 operational vehicles here at the Ontario Regiment Museum. So we can never show you all those vehicles, all those tanks and military vehicles from our history, from the Second World War to today, in one show. So throughout the summer, our Tank Saturday events are once per month, and each one is themed. So when you're visiting the museum today, the static displays, and we also have some tanks in there for you to get up close to touch and have a look at, make sure you ask for a Tank Saturday poster on your way out. They're absolutely free, and really, who doesn't like a poster with a tank on it? Okay, today's theme is the Gulf War, the 1991 Gulf War. In 1990, the forces of Saddam Hussein invaded their neighbor, the small country of Kuwait, and the world responded. The United States, Great Britain, Canada, and other NATO allies went to war to free Kuwait. There was a second Gulf War, as you may recall, but today our theme is that 1991 Gulf War. You're going to see vehicles from many of our allies, and including from the Iraqis, that actually served in that conflict in the Middle East. Some of these vehicles, and I'll point them out to you and tell you a little bit about their history, were actually over there in that conflict. Let's start the show. Here comes our first vehicle. This is a Land Rover 90 Defender. It is a British vehicle. You can notice its camo markings on there. It's done up for desert warfare. This vehicle is very lightly armored. In the rear areas, it's actually used for transport. This is the configuration of a long-range desert group, reconnaissance. So this vehicle, as you can see, it's camouflaged. It has a large camo net. It can hide in the desert. And you might wonder, why does it have two machine guns in the rear? Because being an unarmored vehicle, it has to get out of trouble just as quickly as it can get into trouble. The Humvee is, the Land Rover is a British-made vehicle. It's not your regular family SUV. It's all-terrain. The British Army has been well known since the Second World War with the Desert Rats for their behind enemy lines long-range desert group. One thing that they have, and you won't see it because the vehicle is far away, but it actually has one of the very first GPS units. I know that we all take GPS now for granted, but in 1990, 1991, it was still a military technology. And the Iraqis thought that it would be a pushover with the Western Allies in their hunkered down positions, and that they'd never be able to attack through the desert. What they didn't know is that the Allies had this new technology, which was GPS, Global Positioning System. They could tell exactly where they were in the desert. So I said reconnaissance. The job of this vehicle is to go behind enemy lines and to report back over radio of what they see, where are the enemy positions. Now here comes another reconnaissance vehicle. This one's actually armored. This is a Ferret Scout Car. So unlike the unarmored Land Rover, this actually is an armored vehicle. It is 4 tons. Ferret Scout Car actually has a very interesting history. It was designed at the end of the Second World War to replace the Dingo, which was a British-built armored car. It came into service in the late 1950s and served right up with the British Army into the 1991 Gulf War. That was its last active deployment. Once again, it's a recce vehicle. You can see that the crew commander there also has a machine gun, so it has some bite, but it can actually protect itself from small arms fire. The great thing about the Ferret Scout Car is that it has a very interesting transmission. It can drive in reverse in all 5 gears, so forward and backward at the same speed. So once again, it can get out of trouble just as easily as it can get into trouble. Believe it or not, this museum started back in 1980 with just 9 Ferret Scout Cars. It was known as the Ontario Regiment Ferret Club, and that's really our history where we began. Now to 83 running vehicles and Canada's largest tank museum. He's going over some of the features back there that you can see some of the off-road capability of the Ferret Scout Car. We have some pretty good conditions. Our weather cleared up, it didn't rain, so you're going to see a lot of dust. It'll really add some realism to those desert conditions that these vehicles served in. So here come the 2 different recce vehicles that the British used. And these with the types of vehicles they used in the 1991 Gulf War together. Now you might notice that they are wheeled vehicles. A lot of military vehicles are wheeled, but reconnaissance is also done with tracked vehicles. Kicking up a lot of dust back there. So for the British, the 1991 Gulf War was called Operation Granby, and I'm actually wearing the Operation Granby hat because it's Gulf War Day here at the museum. Obviously, we might remember from the news around here that the Americans, they called it Operation Desert Storm. All right, so now we have our first light tank of today's show. This is the CVRT Scorpion. CVRT stands for Combat Vehicle Reconnaissance Tracked. He's going to take the berm. And this is where the show starts to get loud. Are we going to fire the Scorpion? So CVRT Scorpion, the CVRT family of vehicles, we're going to show you several of them. Here at the museum, we have one of each type of the CVRT. And okay, that's what I meant earlier when I warned you the show was going to be loud. The Scorpion is showing off its 76mm high-velocity weapon. The Scorpion, CVRTs, the Scorpion is pretty much one of the last light tanks in world history. So it's a tracked vehicle, but also used for reconnaissance, armored reconnaissance. So it's not as large as the main battle tanks that you're about to see, but they would actually go out in a desert in a troop. There'd be several of these that would go out together. That 76mm cannon, it could actually take out a lot of other armored vehicles. Let's see if he'll fire again for us. I see he doesn't really want to fire against the crowd. And you can see the shot there just even kicked up the dust.
Whoa.
So also listen to it when it takes off. It has a Jaguar engine. They're very fast. So it's a light tank that was meant for very quick speed, quick striking power. Once again, it can be used in a reconnaissance role also. So it can get in and out of trouble very quickly. And that vehicle you see there, 23 Alpha, that vehicle actually served in the 1991 Gulf War. That is a veteran of the Gulf War with British troops. As you can see, they can get up to real high speed for a tracked vehicle. And as I mentioned before, the CVRT is a family of British military vehicles. Here comes our next one in the CVRT family. This is the CVRT Scimitar. And he's going to take the berm. So you'll notice that he has a much smaller weapon. It's actually a quick firing cannon, whereas the 76mm has a single shell that has to be loaded every time. This vehicle can fire 6 very quick consecutive rounds. Are we going to fire today? So very much like the Scorpion, but in a different role. This one wouldn't go ahead like the Scorpion would in an armored formation. This one would be in the second line. So it would be defending convoys and also defending other striking vehicles like we're about to see. Same design, very fast, different weapon system and different role. That scimitar, with its quick-firing weapon, is defending something that's quite vulnerable, but actually quite deadly to the enemy. It's our next CBRT in the series once the scimitar makes its way around the tank arena. It's going to go over the small feature there so you can see how the track works, all terrain. So the scimitar would be protecting this interesting looking vehicle. This is a CBRT Striker. So in this actually chassis here, there are several different variants. There are ones that are APCs or armored personnel carriers. But this one here has a very special role. What happens when a small CBRT comes up against something really nasty, like a main battle tank? So while the Scorpion and the Scimitar will be keeping that main battle tank busy, they'll position the Striker. See what just came up out of it? That is a missile launcher that has 5 swing-fire missiles. So this is a deadly anti-tank weapon. It will deal with anything that the other CBRTs come across that is way out of their league. Those swing-fire missiles are actually wire-guided. And one of the veterans of the British veterans of the Gulf War was telling me about using them with a joystick. He had fired at a T-54 Iraqi tank. It was just slightly beyond his range. He misguided his range. So it was flying towards the tank, and then he lost control of the missile because the wire snapped. But then he saw it sail down to the T-54. Unfortunately, at the angle it hit, it just bounced off the T-54 and hit a truck full of Iraqi troops that was behind the tank. He was the only striker in the squadron that had a truck painted on the side of his tank instead of just tanks. So here we go. Here's the CBRT family coming out for you to see. The reconnaissance and the striker vehicle. Very fast, kicking up a lot of dust. They can actually get an amazing road speed, you'd be surprised. So these are the British forces that invaded Iraq. What about the American forces? Our next set of vehicles are going to be those that were used by the United States and many of their allies. Here comes the first one, and I'm sure many of you know what this is. You've seen it in lots of movies. This is an armored Humvee. The Humvee was introduced into the U.S. It has bulletproof doors and bulletproof glass windows. You can see that how thick those doors are. And this one is defended by a .50 caliber machine gun. Let's see if we can fire the machine gun. So these were used by the United States from 1985 well into this century. I still believe that some of the National Guard units in the United States still have them. Many of them were sold to their allies now, and unfortunately, many of them were captured by ISIS in Iraq from forces and equipment that were given to the Iraqi army. Now that little turret that the crew commander's in there with his .50 caliber machine gun, that can go 360 degrees, often used for convoy protection. Obviously they wouldn't send him out into battle like that, but if a convoy was attacked, he definitely has a punch. Okay, now for our second United States Army vehicle. This is actually one of the most prolific, even though you've probably only saw it today. You saw some of them rolling around the tank arena before the show. People were buying tickets at the gift shop and getting a ride in an APC, an armored personnel carrier. This one's very special, the M113 Armored Personnel Carrier. It is not a tank. It is not a reconnaissance vehicle. It is for moving troops in and out of a combat zone. Looks like a giant armored box, doesn't it? If you look at the back of the vehicle, it has not only a door, but it has a ramp. So the ramp can drop, so it can quickly deploy a section of infantry onto the battlefield, or also be quickly loaded to move. These would be going alongside in any mechanized force. You would have your reconnaissance vehicles out front. You would have your heavy armor, which need to be supported by infantry. So these would be going along, giving infantry support where the armor was going, so that infantry could deploy. The M113 came out in 1961, and it's just been so darn useful that they continued to produce them up into the 1990s. The U.S. Army last refurbished them in 2012. And the M113 still accounts for over half of all active U.S. armor in the U.S. Armed Forces. It's such a useful vehicle. Here at the museum we have 12 different variants, including a command post, engineering vehicles. It's such a useful chassis. And even though this one here is in its Gulf War paint, these things can swim. They are slightly amphibious, an amphibious vehicle. They can ford rivers. Now for a main battle tank, and I think you can hear it coming over the top of my voice. They're gonna try to take the berm. If they don't take out the berm, this is an M60 Patton main battle tank. Let's see if they're gonna fire for us on top of the berm. This 56-ton tank is just crushing that feature. That's a 105 millimeter main weapon. This was for the longest time, from the 1960s into the 1980s, this was the backbone of the American armored forces. is a 56-ton monster. In the 1991 Gulf War, it was actually a second-line tank. This one we call Grumpy, as you can see there. You notice it has the United States Marine Corps flag. They were used by the United States Marine Corps in the 1991 Gulf War before they were retired. They were replaced by the M1 Abrams, but in 1991, they were still active with the U.S. forces. A very dangerous piece of hardware. Also, still active around the world today. It is the United States sold it to many allies. They're currently in use still with Spain and other nations. That's one of our two M60A2 main battle tanks, Grumpy. We will see Grumpy again later on in the show. Very strong piece of American armor right there. One of the heavier Western main battle tanks. Okay, so let's have one more look at our U.S. armor here. From the Humvee, to the Armored Personnel Carrier M113. Then, of course, Grumpy, the M60 Patton main battle tank. So there's a good look at the Allied armor of the 1991 conflict, but what about the enemy? What were the Iraqis using? Well, the Iraqis didn't have their own armor industry, so they were supplied since the 1970s by the Soviet Union. So they had a massive amount of Soviet equipment, which was actually state-of-the-art frontline equipment. And here you see one of them right now, a very unique vehicle. He's going to take the berm. This is the BMP-1. It looks very strange. It's actually an amazing design by the Soviet Union. And I'll tell you why in a moment, as soon as he gets down in front of us. Notice its low profile. So the Soviets decided that they were also going to build an APC, like the M113, you know, the big metal box. But they mixed the capabilities of an APC with that of a light tank. So you can see that it has a turret. The other APC didn't. It actually has a turret and can fight like a light tank. Also, what just deployed is a swim vane at the front and a snorkel that just popped up behind that turret. and there they go down. And there's the snorkel. He's moving it up and down so you can see it again. So this vehicle, whereas the M113 could ford rivers, this vehicle could actually submerge itself underwater a very unique piece of equipment. And this is what the Allies were up against. The Iraqis had many, many BMPs. And actually the one armored casualty of the Gulf War, which was a Bradley that was blown up, it was blown up by a BMP-1 just like that. And unfortunately, an American soldier lost his life. But that was just part of their armored force. They also had main battle tanks. And here we see an Iraqi T-54 Soviet main battle tank. A T-54 is quite an amazing tank. It came out of the development of the Second World War, of the Russian heavy tanks of the Second World War. It's big, it's loud, and it's noisy, and it was built that way. It was built for shock effect, so that you would hear it coming, so that you would see it coming. Also notice it has a very low profile, whereas that M60 American tank had a very high profile. It makes a much larger target. Where these tanks had a low profile and were much harder to spot if they were in the right position or in a hull down position. It was designed in the conception started in the late 1940s, designed and produced in the late 1950s, and was produced well into the 1980s. It was the most produced tank by the Soviet Union, with over 80,000 T-54, T-55s built. That gave the Soviet Union the largest armored force in the world, and they sold this to all of their allies as well as Iraq. And this is why the Allies had to send in so much firepower. They were afraid of tanks like this. So the Iraqis had T-54s, 55 BMPs, they had T-62s, which are the next generation after this T-55. And here's a very interesting story about this tank. This Iraqi tank, is also a veteran of the 1991 Gulf War. It was captured by the U.S. Marine Corps off the Iraqis and brought home to the United States as a war trophy. And then it's a very long story as to how it got up here to Canada. And we've been restoring it ever since. We just put a new clutch in it last year, which we had to purchase from Poland. But it's actually served with the Iraqi forces. And its history, we know that it may have also served in the Iraq-Iran conflict before that. And we have no idea the service that it may have had with the Soviet Union prior to being sold to the Iraqis. So here we have another look at our Iraqi Soviet vehicles.
The problem with that tank was why they were so Soviets used to stack their ammunition around the inside of the turret, like a circular pattern. And their thought was it would be easy to grab, but as long as the turret was in many places. So literally the turret was the tallest part of the stack.
Okay, so now that I've told you about these vehicles, what they are, how they were used, and a little bit about their history, this is the parade portion of the show, where we're going to parade all the vehicles, the best opportunity to get some video and some photos of these vehicles. We're going to kick up a lot of dust, and we're also going to do it to some cool tank music provided by World of Tanks. Who here plays World of Tanks? By a show of hands. World of Tanks is one of our museum sponsors. They sponsor all of our shows. If you'd like to learn more about tanks and play with tanks at home, you can check out tanksrule.com. Enjoy the parade. close out our show, we have one special segment for you. We call it Battle Royale. We're going to have a simulated tank battle between the American M60 and a German-built Leopard 1 main battle tank. And you are going to decide the winner. So as the Gulf War vehicles pull off the field, with the exception of Grumpy, our M60, and then we're going to see the vehicle that is going to take Grumpy on today. Just waiting for that slow, heavy, mean Soviet tank to get off the field. And we'll bring out our two competitors. While we're waiting for them to take the field, I just want to draw your attention behind you. Today we're joined by the Ontario Regiment. This is the official regimental museum of the Ontario Regiment. They've also brought an armored G-Wagon with us from their armory. The Ontario Regiment is 152 years old. They have this modern equipment here, so you can come get your picture taken with it. And I'm also tell you, the Ontario Regiment is hiring. That's right. If you want to speak to the officer over there, they have guaranteed full-time employment for 4 summers in a row for those interested in learning more about their armed forces and serving with the Ontario Regiment. So please stop by after the show, see the armored G-Wagon, and say thank you and hello to our local regiment, the Ontario Regiment.